There is no doubt, right, that what Zuckerberg is doing here is not out of any kind of conversion to these ideals. It's about the fact that Trump is there. It's about the fact that Trump is there and he's seen Elon Musk basically become one of Trump's key courtiers, and he's afraid of getting left behind. He said that they made these changes, brought all of these content moderations, these fact-checking sort of policies in the first place, because there was such concern that bad actors were polluting and flooding these sites with misinformation, with lies, and that goes up into and including, say, the Kremlin and hostile foreign actors. That's why they did it. They're now saying that they're choosing to remove all of this to quote-unquote get back to their roots.
I genuinely think he had no sense at that point of how quickly his vision for Facebook would be turned into something that he could no longer control.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the Newsagents live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at the Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th, then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester on February the 24th, and finally the Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of these dates, and the link will be in the description below. We are so excited to see all of you there.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
That was Mark Zuckerberg, the owner and founder of Meta, which of course owns, among other things, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, on Fox & Friends, yes, Fox & Friends, announcing a change in the company's editorial policy. Gone would be the fact-checkers, and instead, Elon Musk-style community notes. He was heading firmly in the direction of not only Elon Musk and the way he does Twitter, but also Donald Trump.
Donald Trump's now a big fan of Mark Zuckerberg. He's framing it as the beginning of freedom of speech on Facebook. But is it the end of truth on one of the world's biggest social media sites? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And before we start with Zuckerberg, with Trump, and indeed we'll be talking to Wes Streeting a little bit later about the influence that is coming at us from over the pond. But we should talk about Mark Zuckerberg, because the video that emerged yesterday was a very different sort of thing to what we've seen Zuckerberg do in the past.
It was an amazing interview video that he put out.
I mean, slightly hostage video.
It was totally hostage video.
The whole sort of stance was kind of chained bro.
He's so weird.
Okay, let's talk about what's going on here, because clearly Zuckerberg has heard the threats from Trump, and one of those threats suggested that he'd end up in jail, and he has decided that it is better to go along with what Trump wants after his election victory. And so essentially what he's offering is to get rid of the kind of regulatory oversight that Facebook had introduced after the last election, or as a consequence of failures during their coverage in the last election. And they've said that actually fact-checking has led to political bias. They've said that they got a lot of their fact-checking wrong, and that actually the world would be a better place if they just got rid of it.
Yeah, so Zuckerberg, as I say, on Fox & Friends and on his various platforms, made this announcement. And it's just worth zooming out just for a second to remember like how important this is. We talk a lot about X, Twitter, Elon Musk. That is really important because it's basically the site where politically engaged people, political actors themselves, make the news and often learn about the news. But Facebook, of course, and Instagram are actually used by way, way more people across the world. And Facebook in particular is basically the biggest news online aggregator there is, apart from, say, Google and of course, ourselves. And so it really matters. So among other things, he announced that, as we've been saying, they would replace fact checkers with X-style community notes. They would simplify our content policies and remove restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are out of touch with mainstream discourse, remove the vast majority of censorship mistakes. This is really interesting. Move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California and our US content review to Texas and work with President Trump to push back against foreign governments going after American companies to censor more. And he said he was doing that because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression. Let's just listen to a little bit more of what he had to say.
So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system.
It's so craven. I mean, there is no doubt, right, that what Zuckerberg is doing here is not out of any kind of sort of great kind of conversion to these ideals. It's about the fact that Trump is there. It's about the fact that Trump is there and he's seen Elon Musk basically become one of Trump's key courtiers, and he's afraid of getting left behind. I mean, we can also join up the dots with what we've seen a little bit more generally with what's been going on at Meta. And again, I stress, this really matters because basically all of these, the online world, all these online spaces, these online platforms have basically become synonymous, interchangeable with our democratic spaces. We heard Zuckerberg refer to it there. He said that they made these changes, brought all of these content moderations, these fact-checking sort of policies in the first place because there was such concern that bad actors were polluting and flooding these sites with misinformation, with lies, and that goes up into and including, say, the Kremlin and hostile foreign actors. That's why they did it. They're now saying that they're choosing to remove all of this to quote-unquote get back to their roots, and that links up to the fact that, as we saw just this week, it's been a big week of news in Silicon Valley in all of these different ways, that Nick Clegg, obviously former deputy PM here, who has for the last 5, 6, 7 years been Meta's vice president for global affairs, leaves the company. Who is he replaced with but Joel Kaplan, who is a Republican, worked for the George W. Bush administration, and he said in an accompanying statement that the company wanted to undo the mission creep that has made our rules too restrictive and too prone to over-enforcement. There will no longer be fact-checking on any of these platforms because there's been too much political bias in the fact-checking program. Facts are biased, apparently.
Look, this also saves Meta a huge amount of money. It spends $5 billion on safety and security measures. So this is a mega win for Zuckerberg in terms of what he doesn't now have to do. And I think the way you should look at this actually is not that this was a Damascene conversion that happened overnight, but this is a guy who has been pushed by the political winds actually for the last 8 years. Now, I went to interview Mark Zuckerberg in Facebook, headquarters in about 2011, 2012. And I remember that interview really...
then in some ways. I mean,
well,
Facebook
it felt new,
newish,
and he sounded like a kind of, a frat boy. He described Facebook like it was Strava. He's like, well, it's great. You can go for a run and you can share recipes with your friends and you can plan your hiking trips with your friends.
Now he's just stacked and weird.
I genuinely think he had no sense at that point of how quickly his vision for Facebook would be turned into something that he could no longer control. And if you go to 2016... what happened in 2016 with the accusations that were levelled at Facebook for election interference led to him writing this very apologetic post saying, we've got to take this seriously, we've got to grapple with false and misleading information. The bottom line is we take misinformation seriously. Why did they do that? Because that was where the political pressure was coming from at the time. He was hauled before Congress. He was told that they had to do better. They had to get, their fact checks made more rigorous. And now he's just responding to the new political climate, which actually he already started to go towards a year ago. I mean, when he banned Trump, you'll remember he banned Trump from Facebook 4 years ago after January the 6th, literally kind of 4 years ago this week. And then he kind of had to roll back, and some of the censorship or some of the fact check, we should really call it, was not applied to politicians. So he already said, I'm not going to get between what politicians are saying to the public. Now, people were aghast at that point because they said, well, if a politician comes out, I mean, as they often do, as Trump does daily, and says things that are categorically, provably wrong, are you going to call it out? And he said no, because I think it's important for, the public to hear what their politicians say. Now, yesterday, I mean, there's a press conference that we can, take you to, but Trump was asked, after a lot of untruths had been spoken over the course of an hour, Trump was asked if he thought that his threats to Zuckerberg had made a difference. This was his response.
Facebook. I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive. I watched it on Fox. I'm not allowed to say that. Say it?
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past? With
Probably. Yeah, probably.
There's something so clean about that, isn't it? Trump doesn't mind being a bully, right? He's already threatened Zuckerberg with prison. And actually, for all this talk of freedom of speech, Zuckerberg clearly doesn't have any when it comes to deciding what he wants to do with his own platform.
Anyone who says elections don't matter, I mean, just look, even just this week in terms of, and Trump hasn't even taken office yet, Justin Trudeau resigns as Prime Minister of Canada. One reason, it's not the only reason, but one reason is the pressure that clearly Trump was putting him under, just taking the piss out of him, making a mockery of him. And now we've seen, one of the biggest shifts in the editorial policy of one of the biggest online companies in the world that almost certainly would not have taken place if Kamala Harris had won the presidency. And, the net result of all of this, and it's not just because what we're seeing, we've talked about on the show a little bit before, what we're seeing is a remarkable alliance emerge between the MAGA movement centered around Trump and big parts of Silicon Valley, particularly these tech firms.
Which is now Texas. I mean, yeah. Texas is the new Silicon Valley.
Totally.
He's moving his moderation people to Texas. Texas, just to remind you, is the home of Joe Rogan. It's the place that famously Kamala Harris decided she couldn't afford to spend 3 hours going to visit because it was too far away from the swing states that she then went on to lose anyway. And Texas has now become, if you like, MAGA Silicon Valley.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it, which is that the internet, obviously, in so many ways, has been crafted and its mores and its norms sort of born out of California.
Yeah.
Increasingly, for the next decade, or at least the next half decade, the internet's going to look a lot more like Texas and feel, for us, a lot more like Texas, with all of the values of Texas and that kind of more libertarian streak. If you don't like what Elon Musk has done to Twitter, well, buckle up. Because these other big sites, Instagram, Facebook, and a lot, are going to look a lot more like Musk's vision of the internet than the Silicon Valley standard Zuckerberg era kind of way that he's done it, at least for the last 5 years. The whole of the online space is going in a Musk direction.
And I think you can throw Bezos into that as well. You'll remember that Bezos, I think 12 days before the election, decided not to endorse Kamala Harris. Much of his editorial team were pressing him to do that at the Washington Post. He didn't. He's now just bought for Amazon the Melania documentary for, I think, 40 million.
Is that right? I hadn't seen that. Right.
So there is definitely a sort of like, can I stroke you? Is everything okay? Is there anything else I can do? And I think, I'm sort of laughing, but there is a different order of things here. And nobody is denying that this wasn't a democratically, won election. But there is emerging something that feels more like a monarchy here.
Or an oligarchy.
Well, or a kleptocracy, right? Which is that there is a king at the top here and there are courtiers and they recognise that their position is in terms of how they respond to the king now. And it doesn't matter whether they're in his inner circle as a cabinet or whether they're meant to be big corporations that normally would have a bit of, tussle with the government. He's actually asked Trump, and I think this is an important thing to listen to, he's actually asked Trump to help him with regulation for other countries. So that's Meta, Facebook, going to the government to say, how do I deal with Europe? How do I deal with India? How do I deal with all the places where I want to thrive now?
But this is, I think, the big question now for certainly the EU. And I think this move absolutely sets Meta up for yet another regulatory clash with the EU. Yeah. Zuckerberg mentioned it in his remarks. They've already got a very rocky relationship with the EU regulators. Threads, which obviously they launched some time ago, launched in the EU 5 months later than it did in the UK and US because of regulatory problems. I think this is a big question for the UK and EU, and it goes back to something we've been talking about all week. Given that we've got this alliance now between for want of a better expression, Silicon Valley, Texas, plus MAGA and Trump. In Europe, if we don't like this vision of the internet where anything goes, and it's not just about free speech, but it's about your own facts and all of the polluting, damaging ways that can affect our democracies, do we have the will and even the power and technological means to do anything about it in regulatory terms?
Well, also, we might regulate what people see in Europe, but it doesn't stop all the craziness that may be kind of flooding the airwaves everywhere else. So in that case, do we feel superior because we've got something that is regulated, and as they would say, censored? Because we might have our own, truths coming at us. But if actually the rest of the world is being flooded with kind of, non-fact-based bullshit, why are we the winners?
Yeah, why are we the winners? And as you say, is there anything we can even do to prevent it coming our way? But I think that is a question. Look, Keir Starmer, again, it's all... We were talking earlier, weren't we, about, it's extraordinary right now. It kind of feels like Britain and the kind of British news ecosystem, for want of a better expression. It's like, as you were saying, we basically just feel like a satellite right now, right? To everything that's going on in Washington, in Texas, in California. Our news cycle, and I know there are people listening to us who are probably frustrated about this, is being dominated by this tiny handful of men. They're nearly all men, these oligarchical kind of figures. And people might be frustrated about that, and Keir Starmer's clearly frustrated about it. But in a sense, we can do no other, because it does have enormous impact on our politics and just how people consume information, And we're in a position now where, if you're printing in a newspaper or you're broadcasting or something, the different set of rules and criteria. I mean, this all basically goes back to the old question we've had, right? Which is, are these social media sites, are they publishers or not? They've always said they're not publishers. Exactly.
This goes back to what I was saying about Zuckerberg. He just wanted to be the facilitator, really. Get together with your mates and go for your runs. And then he became the person who was left in charge of fact-checking, then has been taken off fact-checking, then he's been pushed by the political winds, right?
Because it's not like the fact-checking was amazing, we should say, by the way, as well. There's still plenty of misinformation there. It's just going to be nudged even further in that kind of Wild West kind of state of nature sort of situation.
Yeah, I mean, some of the fact-checking was wrong. He's called out the fact-checking for being wrong. The fact-checkers that work for him are now furious because they're like, well, hang on, we did a pretty good job. It was much better than if we weren't there. But I think that's the point. He's always thought of himself as a publisher. And we've always asked that question. You can't just be a publisher because you will get battered by the political winds, as he is.
Keir Starmer and his ministers would doubtless much rather be thinking about other things. But actually, how voters get their information is massively important, and it is going to shape politics and the long run up to the next election. We're going to be talking to Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, about that and other things just after this. So we're going to be talking to Wes Streeting in a minute, as we were saying. Worth just catching you up, though, on something which kind of brings all of this together. Obviously been talking a lot about the grooming scandal this week, and that has taken centre stage in Parliament today, because today is the second reading of the government's Children Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which is kind of a bit of a mammoth piece of legislation. It does all sorts of different things. There's elements in it about children's social care, about breakfast clubs, about schooling and the curriculum and the structure of English schools, which maybe we can talk about. But the reason it's got salience in particular to this question of grooming is because the Conservatives, under Kemi Badenoch, have attached an amendment to it, which has been selected by the Speaker, which would compel the government to set up a national grooming inquiry, obviously which Elon Musk has been calling for, something, as we know, the government has been resisting very strongly. That will go down, maybe by the time you're listening to this, it will have gone down because the government's got a massive majority, but the Conservatives clearly trying to get some political momentum from it.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to vote it down over the demands for this national statutory inquiry. But it is more complicated than that, because they've also criticised other elements of the legislation which would clamp down on some of the current freedoms enjoyed by academy schools, whether academy schools can actually pay teachers more, whether they have to sign up to a one-size-fits-all curriculum. So in a sense, the Conservatives are trying to make this about two things, about whether Labour is actually pulling down education standards, which is one side, and whether they are failing to address concerns over a national inquiry. And Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, has today accused them of an absolutely sickening attempt to halt the progress that she says, that Labour says, would provide new safeguards for children who are homeschooled. We're going to talk to Wes Streeting in a second, and for once, actually, it's not about health, because there are other things today that he wants to get off his chest.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to kind of where we started about the digital sphere, if you like, thinking about why it is that the Conservatives want to put this amendment down, even though they know they will lose it because the government's got a majority. Why do they want to do it? And by the way, Labour did versions of this in opposition as well, so it's not unique to them, but it is going to reignite the whole grooming thing online even further, because what they want to do is produce a load of GIFs which basically say, this Labour MP voted your Labour MP in this area, which they can micro-target per constituency. Your Labour MP voted against a national inquiry into child sex grooming. And you will be seeing that on your timelines, I have no doubt, by the end of the week. Well, we're 8 days into the new year, and it's my second interview with Wes Streeting. How many more will we pack in by the end of 2025?
Well,
Wes?
it's part of my New Year's resolutions, give
see
the
me
people
more.
what they want. And also, more importantly, I'm here to collect my award, because you, Lewis Goodall, gave me Worst Minister of the Year in the 2024 News
why did I
Agents
say
Awards.
What was that for?
You're just a horrible person.
Yeah,
Exactly,
correct.
right?
Yeah.
Am I far right?
Wes was very funny. You made the funniest speech of the year.
I don't think we should talk about that. I think we should move very swiftly on. What do I get? Do I get a newsagent's mug?
You get a
Sweatshirt.
weekend with John Sopel in the Chilterns. You fancy that?
That definitely feels like a suitable punishment for
Correct. I think
Worst
the worst.
Minister.
Correct.
I have to do better this year.
We should talk about the last few days. We've seen a reaction from the papers, plenty of other political voices as well, saying that Keir Starmer said that anyone who is calling for a public inquiry into grooming is far right. What's your reaction to that?
That is explicitly not what Keir Starmer said. He was very specific about where he was directing his criticism. And actually, in a quite extended set of questions he got from your colleagues in the media after launching the NHS waiting list reform plan, actually he was saying that he's certainly not closed-eared or closed-minded to people who are saying that there are still big issues to sort out, whether in the criminal justice system or in social services, child protection, victims' voices, most importantly of all. What he has said, though, is that we've had a national inquiry. We've had lots of specific inquiries into specific places and scandals, loads of recommendations that are built up, and no action. I mean, if you take the J report, there were 20 recommendations in there. Not a single one has been implemented. I was genuinely shocked. Yvette Cooper had called for changes to the law to make it an offence not to report or disclose child sexual abuse when she was Shadow Home Secretary under Ed Miliband in 2014. And here we are at the start of 2025, and it's now down to Yvette Cooper as Home Secretary a decade later to implement it because nothing's happened. And I think what you got from Keir yesterday was two fundamental frustrations and things that, first and foremost, actually genuine anger about the state of inaction on child protection and sexual exploitation. And as he said, this is something he worked on as Director of Public Prosecutions. He took a number of really substantial steps as DPP to act on going after historic cases where people thought they'd gotten away with it. He put in place specialist prosecution teams to make sure we could bring rapists and sex offenders to court and to bring successful prosecutions. There's more to do, and that's one of the reasons he came into politics.
So what did he mean then when he said that certain politicians were jumping on a far right?
Well, and that's the thing, Lewis, and that's why I think he was explicitly not saying anyone with concerns about this is far right. Quite the opposite. He's concerned about the issue. It is, I think, a bit much Firstly, to see Conservative politicians who had the chance to do something not doing something, and then, like the arsonist, blaming the fire brigade for not putting out the fire fast enough, criticising this side of the election. That would be bad enough. But I think all of us have felt a sense of not just revulsion, but actually genuine shock that some of the things that have been said about Jess Phillips, who's got a long track record of standing up for victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse, the way in which there was an attempt to smear her, and yet you've got politicians on the opposition side who aren't willing to kind of condemn that. And look, in terms of the overall issues, I think there's been far too much focus on Elon Musk. It's the victims that are the most important voices in all of this. It's the victims that deserve justice. And we've got to act to make sure there aren't new victims, future scandals. That's our responsibility. That should be the most important thing. So that's actually more important than any smearing of politicians. And frankly, you know, it's not been pleasant for Jess or Keir, and it's certainly made lots of us angry. That's a second order issue to the thing we're most concerned about, which is the state of inaction we've seen and our determination to put it right.
So this week the Times has called for a new inquiry. Nigel Farage has said if Labour doesn't set up an inquiry, he'll do one himself with independent judges. Kemi Badenoch's putting down the Children's Welfare Bill. Are you going to whip against that?
Well, I don't think we've seen the amendment yet. And if, for example, because I saw a report the other day that said she was going to put an amendment down to the bill this Wednesday. Now, the only sort of bill you put down at this stage in the process, at what's known as second reading, where you're voting on the principle of the bill overall, is what's known as a reasoned amendment, where if you vote for the reasoned amendment, you vote against the whole bill falls. So it'd be pretty daft for them to do that. And if they try and sink this particular piece of legislation rather than amend it, then that would mean lots of child protection, child safeguarding stuff that's in this bill would just be lost. So we're definitely not going to support that. You know, the people whose voices I'm particularly interested in all of this are victims groups, people involved in the criminal justice system, in child protection, law enforcement, and Prime Minister, Home Secretary, the Victims Minister. They engage with those groups all of the time. But at the moment, I think the frustration the Prime Minister expressed yesterday was a frustration that the J report hadn't been implemented. Across the board, the Tory line on every issue at the moment seems to be, you've had 14 years to sort these problems out. Why haven't you done it in 6 months? To which our response is, you had 14 years in government to fix these problems. Many of the problems we see in the country today have been caused by those 14 years of Conservative government. It is a bit rich for them just 6 months into this government to be on the attack in this way, especially on such serious issues where you'd hope we could actually build a degree of consensus, of joint endeavour, because these are serious issues and serious crimes. And I think some of the attempts to politicise this has been pretty distasteful.
But do you worry that they're winning the narrative?
I mean, I thought Robert Jenrick got kicked all over the shop on the Today programme by Nick Robinson, not because Nick was being particularly unreasonable in his line of questioning, but because he was being direct and forensic about the inaction of Robert Jenrick as a Home Office Minister, as a Justice Minister, the inaction of Suella Braverman, who was Home Secretary and refused calls for an inquiry herself. The inaction of the Conservatives on this issue. You know, what's been striking thinking about Labour's response overall over the last week, and obviously I was out a bit before the weekend and yesterday. I was listening to other colleagues. When I came out last Friday on the airwaves and some of this Musk stuff was just kicking off, what was in my head was, let's focus here on the victims. Let's focus here on the seriousness of these issues. Let's try and avoid this becoming some sort of party political knockabout, and let's try and avoid this issue being reduced to some sort of media soap opera about one person with a Twitter account in America. And so the whole kind of tone of the government was, let's just focus on the seriousness of this issue. And I'm just genuinely shocked by the extent to which the Conservatives, who were only in government 5 minutes ago, have just seen an opportunity to try and sling mud, smear their opponents, and actually try and give the impression that this government doesn't care about victims of the most horrific, sickening crimes. I don't believe our Conservative predecessors didn't care. We could have come out all guns blazing last week saying, you've lot have got a flaming cheek. You were in government for 14 years. Yvette Cooper was calling for action in 2014. You've done absolutely bugger all about it. We tried not to kind of come out and do a party political knockabout on such serious issues, but in the end, we do have to defend Keir Starmer's record as Director of Public Prosecutions, Jess Phillips' record as a long-standing campaigner and worker in domestic violence and support services for victims of violence against women and girls. And we've also had to set out what this government is doing. We will do it. We've got a majority. We'll get on with it. We'll do it on our own. It's just a shame we have to do it against an attention-seeking, cynical Conservative Party that has drifted so far from the mainstream. You actually have the bizarre situation in British politics today where Nigel Farage, who is arguably to the right of the Conservative Party, is willing to confront Tommy Robinson, and the Conservative Party seem to parrot his position.
Okay.
That is how far the Conservative
You think
Party...
they're dancing to Tommy Robinson's tune?
I think they have drifted so far. What I've heard, and what I actually saw in recent days, was Nigel Farage actually wanting to distance himself from Tommy Robinson. I don't see the Conservative Party's leadership doing that. I just don't. I think it's remarkable how far they have drifted from from mainstream politics. Yeah, I mean, on Sunday on Laura Coombsberg, you had the former Conservative advisor on the panel who was attacking Robert Jenrick in particular for the tune that he's playing, and I look across at them at the moment. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people in the Conservative Party that I might agree with, but I look at them and think, OK, you are mainstream centre-right politicians. And I look at some of the others and some of the things they're saying and thinking, what has happened to you?
Well, do you think that Kemi Badenoch is dancing to Tommy Robinson's tune?
I don't really know where she is at the moment. She seems to be playing a cynical tune. I don't think I would go as far as... I'm certainly not going to try and suggest that she is trying to ape him, or... I think, though, that I've seen almost a stronger line from Nigel Farage against Tommy Robinson than I've seen from the Conservative Party.
The bigger question...
And I just wonder what's happened to the mainstream Conservative Party, where we would have strong ideological differences, strong principled political differences, and we'd engage in a battle of ideas. And I don't really recognise the Conservative Party as it is today. And even you've got people like Neil O'Brien, who used to run the Cameroonian think tank Policy Exchange and used to be someone that I identified as being on the thoughtful centre-right, tweeting like he's on the populist right. And I just think, what's happened to you guys? Like, what is this? Is this cynical? Is this some kind of Damascene conversion? Have you lost a sense of your conviction? What's going on?
This is a bigger question, isn't it, than just... where the Conservative Party is positioning itself. It's about whether Elon Musk is calling the shots now in British politics or UK policy. Do you think he is interfering in our system?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's gone out of his way yesterday to try and focus on the substance of the issues at hand, to focus on the voices and experiences of victims, and the responsibility we have as a government to deliver a safe country for...
I mean, Macron said it. Olaf Scholz has said it. They've said, we now think that Elon Musk is interfering in other countries' electoral systems, essentially, politics. Do you?
Yeah, but I think... and I the reason I'm sort of being slightly hesitant in answering now is because I feel like I'm in danger of starting to criticise the media, and I think that I try not to, because I think politicians criticising the media is like... Brits complaining about the weather.
He's not just the media, is he? He's like the right-hand man of the incoming president and the richest man in the world.
I do think there has been way too much oxygen, airtime, column inches dedicated to the Twitter rants of one person in the United States of America.
That would include Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz.
He doesn't know what's going on in this country. He hasn't got his facts straight. He's smearing decent people. And we're not going to dance to that tune.
Well, will you change something? Will you change electoral law, for example? Are you worried about money from the richest man in the world coming in? And is there anything you do to stop it?
Well, there's been loads of speculation about this reform donation, hasn't there? But we haven't seen it. And certainly if we are thinking about something like the integrity of our elections, the ethics of political donations and the rules that govern them, we will make judgments about those issues on first principles. What we aren't going to do is just because someone speculated about a donation for one person to a political opponent, then say, "Oh, we're going to bring in laws to stop."
But you're a long-term thinker.
That's not the way.
That's not the way.
That's not the way we go.
I mean, you must have something in place in case that happens, because you can't do it after the the horse has bolted, right?
Well, in terms of my kind of role and responsibility, protecting the integrity of elections, those are the responsibilities of other government ministers and other cabinet ministers, and certainly if they're thinking of
change?
Certainly if they're planning any change to the laws, I'm not aware of that, and that's decisions for other colleagues to decide with the Prime Minister. But as I say, I think there is a point of principle here, which is, of course, we want to defend the integrity of our democracy, the ethics of our elections, and make sure that political donations are well managed, governed, transparent, with the right rules in place. You've got to make decisions about that on principles and first principles. What you don't do is think, oh, well, one of our opponents might get a whopping big donation from one person. Let's act to stop that, because then I think that just looks.
But you've never had to think on this
unfair.
scale before, have you? I mean, we are in uncharted territory here.
There's lots of speculation, and as I say, there's been lots of speculation about this donation. He was meant to be donating $100,000 or whatever it was to Reform, and the next minute he's tweeting that Nigel Farage should be replaced as leader of the Reform Party, and if I may say, that is a very good reason why this constant speculation about what one person is doing is a bit trivial, really, because...
It's not trivial, is it? Because we've seen in the last few days alone the impact he can have on British politics. The Prime Minister was forced to address the things that he'd said about your ministerial colleagues and about Starmer himself. Do you think he does spread far-right messaging in British politics, far-right material in British politics?
Well, I mean, I've been very critical about what he said about Jess Phillips. I've been very critical about the misinformation, disinformation that's come from his account and the risk that poses. In all the conversations I've had in recent days with the PM, with Jess over the weekend about how she's felt in all of this, what's been striking is, whatever their frustrations about what's been said about them and their records, their first and foremost concern in every conversation I've had has been about what we need to do on the substance of the issue. What are we going to do to deliver justice for victims? And what are we going to do to keep women, girls, kids in our country safe? I mean, that's what they've both always been about.
Does delivery make the noise and the misinformation and the populist easy answers go away?
I hope so. I think people voted for change at the last general election. This country is crying out for it. And actually, when you look at the challenges we've had across Western liberal democracy, from the populist left and the populist right, these are cries for change. We want a mandate to deliver that change. It does take time. It's not easy, as I was reflecting over the weekend when I was talking about the range of challenges in health and social care. But if the Justice Secretary was sat in this chair now, Shabana Mahmood, she'd say our prisons are overcrowded and we've got massive court backlogs. Bridget Phillipson would be saying school buildings are crumbling, I don't have enough teachers. Liz Kendall would be saying we've got a rising benefits bill and we've got high numbers of children in poverty. I could go round the cabinet table and point to the really big challenges that we inherited with that massive hole that we were left and the country was left in. And that's before we then look at the challenges facing us in a volatile world. The challenges facing this government and facing our country are broad and they are vast and they will take time to solve. They're not easy. And I think most reasonable people across our country know that change will take time, and ultimately they're going to judge us on the results. Do they feel this country is in a better place at the next election than when Labour was given permission to change it? and all of our focus, even when there is all of this noise around, and even when we've got editorials giving us a hard time, or where we've got someone who's come on Twitter and tried to distract the government from its focus, or indeed when we're getting criticised for making unpopular decisions.
Shall I tell you what
we'll make unpopular decisions if we genuinely believe they're the right ones for the country and getting us out of the hole that was left in. And that's the conviction and that's the drive that's motivating Keir and the whole team every single day.
What could create a lot of noise is if Farage goes through with his threat of holding his own independent inquiry into grooming. What would you say to him? Would you urge him not to do so?
Nigel Farage isn't a particularly sort of special case in this conversation. I just say to him quite reasonably, what is it you're hoping or expecting to find that any one of these other inquiries hasn't found? Because often when people have talked about specific challenges, for example, the challenge that fear of being called racist or fear of upsetting community cohesion has stopped people from coming forward and either reporting or even investigating some of these absolutely sickening rape gangs. Well, that challenge, and the reason we know about it, was identified by whistleblowers and put in black and white by Louise Casey when she did her report into this issue. So I just sort of say to people, I think with respect, we know what the issue is, and having kind of just gently said to, some of the media coverage has focused too much on Musk. Also, credit to the investigative journalists who's done a hell of a lot on this over the years for bringing this to light and giving victims their voice, shining a spotlight on places that people have been afraid to go. It's because of that sunlight has been the best disinfectant. We know what the challenges are. We've got a ream of recommendations that haven't been fulfilled. Surely we would be better off getting on with those recommendations rather than commissioning a new inquiry. And I think that if we can have that discussion in a more calm, reasonable way, where people can come forward and say, well, look, here's why I think another inquiry, though, would be helpful for the following reasons. If we're able to have that discussion in a more thoughtful, considered way, I think we'd be doing victims a lot more justice than, frankly, a lot of the noise in the last week has done.
So it could happen at some point, an inquiry.
Well, as I say, I haven't, it's not my decision to make first and foremost, but speaking for myself, I haven't yet heard a convincing answer that says we need a new inquiry because ... that is going to lead us to new conclusions or recommendations that we haven't already seen from any number of inquiries that have already taken place. And, going back to your original point, when Keir has expressed concern about the far right, that's not people who are raising legitimate concerns about a sickening set of crimes. He's talking specifically about far right actors, and he's talking about people who've fanned the flames, who are our political opponents in politics, not. Well, as I said, Keir's addressed that. We're certainly not. Well, partly because Keir made a point yesterday of not going out to name names, because partly what he was trying to do is move us away from the soap opera.
Yeah, but not naming names
and not
that leaves the space open.
No, he was
say he's saying it about everybody who's got concerns.
He was so clear about the fact he was talking about politicians, not well-meaning members of the public who are understandably angry about this sickening set of crimes and are demanding action and are demanding justice and are demanding that we protect victims and we protect people from becoming future victims. That was the argument he was making yesterday. I thought he made it in a powerful way, in a convincing way. If we can have a more calm, sensible discussion about this, I think we'll be doing victims in the country a better service than the last week has. And I hope that once this starts to calm down a bit, I hope that Kemi Badenoch, as the new leader of the Conservative Party, might reflect a bit more on the conduct of members of her shadow cabinet, on the conduct of her party.
Really? You think they've behaved badly?
I do. And I look across at them at the moment and I just don't recognise it as the Conservative Party. Certainly not the Conservative Party of John Major, certainly not the Conservative Party of David Cameron, certainly not the Conservative Party of Theresa May, not even the Conservative Party of Rishi Sunak.
So when Robert Jenrick says that this scandal started with mass migration, which is what he said on Twitter in his Telegraph article, what do you say to that?
I think that tarring everyone with the same brush on an issue that is as serious and contentious as this is a deep injustice. And I thought it was striking that when he was challenged on his words and he was asked if he was attributing them to the parents of Sajid Javid or Sadiq Khan, but I could almost hear him squirming. And of course we know that in the case of grooming gangs in towns across the country, there were Pakistani grooming gangs that people were afraid to go after and call out as such because they were worried about being accused of being racist or upsetting community cohesion, as Louise Casey identified. That sort of political correctness we've got no time for. But nor should we just be idle bystanders to the idea that you just smear people because the colour of their skin is different or the faith that they practice is different. In fact, I've been brought up in a country, a liberal democracy, that is a democracy where people can worship different faiths.
Do you think
hold
Robert
different
Jenrick
beliefs,
was smearing people, a whole group of people?
I just ask Robert Jenrick to just... I remember Robert, when we were at university, I would just ask Robert Jenrick to just kind of take stock, and people like Neil O'Brien as well, who I think thought was centre-right, just to take stock for a moment and really question what it is they stand for, what kind of country they want to live in, and what kind of politics we want to see. I thought I was living and growing up in a country that was at ease with its modern identity, that was at ease with people of different races, different faiths, different backgrounds, living and coexisting together, respecting each other. I thought one of the values that this country was founded on was equality, a belief that everyone is equal under the law. I mean, these liberties, these freedoms have been at the heart of English and British identity long before democracy emerged in so many other countries across our continent and across our world. And yet I sort of listened to some of these postings, some of these articles, some of these interviews from people I thought were mainstream centre-right and think, are you really defending British values here with the way you're conducting yourself and some of these arguments? Are you really suggesting that people who have a different faith than my faith, or have a different skin colour or heritage than my heritage, are you really saying that these people don't share our values, don't share our way of life? And crucially, are you saying that people in my own community, people, not just people I represent, but people who are my friends, are you saying that they're not as sickened by the idea of grooming rape gangs who exploit kids, who rape young women? Are you saying that they're not as affronted by these things as someone who looks like me or practices my faith? And I'd like to see, for all of the heat and division and frenzy of politics, I would like to see us return to mainstream democratic norms, civility, good debate and discussion, robust debate, but a debate that doesn't leave people whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents came to this country and made Britain their home. I would like to see the debate conducted in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're less safe in this country, less included, less accepted. And I'd be doing my constituents a disservice if I didn't relay faithfully conversations I've had in recent years in supermarkets, on the doorstep, in my local Labour Party meetings, with people who are deeply proud to be British, who are proud of the contribution they, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents have made to this country. I'd be doing them a disservice if I didn't say that they have been made to feel less welcome, less included, less safe in this country as a result of some of the rhetoric and some of the toxic political discourse we've seen.
Well, before we go, we have a question from Henry.
Hello there, newsagents. My name's Henry. Thanks for everything you do. I've been listening solidly since the beginning. My question is regarding Donald Trump's recent statements regarding the military takeover of both the Panama Canal and of Greenland. What are your thoughts on it? Is he serious or is it just BS?
Just in the words, isn't it? Your thoughts on the military takeover of Greenland.
Yeah. Oh, I did think I'd be talking about the military takeover of the Panama Canal.
He has
and
got a bee
Greenland
in his
today.
bonnet about it, hasn't he? He's very, very interested in Greenland.
I mean, to be honest, by the time this goes out, Greenland may in fact have been invaded.
We should just be grateful he's not coming after us, given what Elon's been saying this week.
The next Battle of Hastings.
But as I say, maybe it's just a staging post for us.
No.
I mean, the problem is we don't know, do we? That's.
Look, I
He
think
doesn't
we
like
do know.
war.
I think
he doesn't like war.
I think
He
we
thinks it's very
do know that
expensive.
he doesn't really want to invade Greenland,
No.
but he does want to frighten people. It's the equivalent. I think it's the equivalent of putting a small boy on a coat peg and leaving him dangling for a little bit whilst you frisk his pockets for lunch money.
I also think there's like an ongoing question at this point about what Trump wants now, because he does seem. I mean, maybe it's just because we're comparing him to Elon, who is utterly frenzied, but Trump almost seems
Calm,
almost
grown up.
almost. I mean, obviously it's a low bar, but I just think he's achieved it all, right? He's beaten everyone. He's vanquished all of his enemies. He's got the second term.
He's slowed down.
He's got playing a lot of golf. But I wonder in his head. I mean, maybe he doesn't even conceive of it this way. Maybe he's just challenging himself. This is what could be dangerous, right? It's when Dalboy finally becomes a millionaire, or he tries to become a billionaire, right? It's like, where do you go next? And maybe
I think
maybe
there's
it's
only one
Nut.
answer.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's Nunavut.
Nunavik. No, I think
Nunavut is the capital of.
no. Nuuk is the capital.
Oh yeah, you're right.
I've been
Sorry,
to
Nunavut.
Greenland.
No, sorry, you're
Nunavut's
right.
Canada.
Sorry. Yeah, you're right. Sorry,
Do you know
my
who I
mistake.
saw in Greenland? On the tarmac.
Martin Sheen,
Very close.
Big Bird.
Even closer.
I don't know who.
Roman
was it? John
Abramovich.
Sopel. Roman Abramovich.
Yeah.
I got really close at the end there with John. Did you see?
Yes, you
John's
did.
obviously a touch richer.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
Yeah. Because that's where he goes to skate. He has an absolutely massive yacht that he sort of... Do I mean yacht? I mean something that looks like a battleship but is in fact a yacht.
Have you just outed where he goes to escape the Kremlin?
Well, this was a long time ago.
Oh, okay, fine. I'm
But-
sure the Kremlin probably know.
They probably do. It's like you can't miss the boat. Anyway, we had a little chat, little selfie.
Right.
Yeah.
You had a
And,
selfie with Roman.
I've got it on my phone.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
bit of compliment on him.
I think we may be diverting here, but we are going to be talking more about Trump, that press conference, Greenland, Canada, and the rest on our very first episode of The Newsagents USA this year. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.